considered an existential threat. So therefore, when the diplomacy was going on, there was no actual offer on let's discuss NATO, let's discuss your concerns. They were not only not discussed, they were considered illegitimate. And instead of which, we got an endless period of bloc discipline, of saying the Allies are standing shoulder to shoulder. We needed more debate. We needed a rather more open discussion. And so, I mean, I'm not justifying again, but Moscow then felt, and it was unanimous in the way things work, that, you know, Russia's back was to the wall. And so we are where we are catastrophically. But this was predicted, and it was avoidable, and our diplomats have failed us. We've had 7 years of the Minsk Accords where those nearly 4 million people in the Donbass, and that's important, we tend to forget this, but I've not heard an adequate Western reaction of condemnation. 80% of the mortar attacks and so on were on the citizens in the Donbass, in Donetsk, the city is on a borderline. It was shocking. Also, the suppression of Russian language media and so on for the last few years. So we had a virulently anti-Russian government in Kiev, which was then, even in the last couple of weeks, talking about becoming a nuclear power. This should have been slammed down immediately by our diplomats. And I was shocked to see that this discourse of a nuclear weapon-powered Ukraine next door to Russia, this is just so absurd. It's as if Moscow didn't exist. Its concerns were not important. Again, I do not justify the actions. It was wrong. But it was still, that's how we got to it. We have failed dramatically. Endless talk of sanctions and more sanctions and so on will not solve the issue either. It's going to be a long-term conflict, which actually will only encourage. And by the way, there's no question of Russia going beyond Ukraine. It was always that issue, the fundamental existential threat that it was perceived to be.
Well, on the day that we've seen a Russian invasion of Ukraine begin, we will leave you with live pictures from the capital, Kiev, and the scene from Maidan Square as people wait to see what Friday will bring. Thank you for watching Euronews Tonight.
Get the latest world news from a European perspective.
You're watching Euronews Tonight. I'm Mariam Zaidi, and these are the headlines this hour. The sound of air raid sirens ringing out across Ukraine's capital, Kiev, following the start of Russia's invasion of the country. President Zelensky calls for calm.
Putin has unleashed a war with Ukraine and the entire democratic world. He wants to destroy our state, everything that we have built, everything we live for.
Ukraine confirms that Russian soldiers have occupied the former nuclear power plant at Chernobyl.
EU leaders meeting in Brussels say Russia will be held accountable for its attack on Ukraine and that sanctions will target the heart of Russia's economy. Fear and desperation, Ukrainians start to leave the capital as fears of a Russian invasion grow stronger. Hello and welcome to the show. Now, there has been widespread international condemnation of Russian President Vladimir Putin following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry says that they are engaging in battles on several fronts. At least 57 people have been killed and 169 wounded. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his army has been involved in intense fighting to the south. However, the Prime Minister says they have lost the Chernobyl area, the site of the deadly nuclear power plant explosion in 1986.
According to the latest information, the Chernobyl exclusion zone and all the facilities of the nuclear power station are under the control of Russian forces.
Well, Matthew in the Cube has been following those assaults on Ukraine, including that seizure of Chernobyl. Matthew?
A declaration of war against the whole of Europe. That's how Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has described Russia's incursions and assaults on Ukrainian territory. He pledged that his country would defend against what Vladimir Putin has called a military operation. This invasion of Ukraine by Russia appears to have been a three-pronged assault. From the north and Russia's ally Belarus, from the east and the already held territories by pro-Russian separatists of Luhansk and Donetsk, and from the south and the annexed peninsula of Crimea. As you can see from this map here, a number of attacks in a number of Ukrainian cities. In the early hours of Thursday morning, residents in southern port cities like Mariupol and Odessa woke up to shelling, as well as in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. Russia's defense ministry said that this operation was targeting Ukraine's military infrastructure, but dozens of people, including civilians, are so far known to have been killed. Later on Thursday, Ukraine also confirmed that Russian forces had occupied a military base near the capital Kiev, as well as the former nuclear power plant of Chernobyl, located 130 kilometers to the north. Chernobyl was the scene of the world's worst nuclear disaster in April 1986, when reactor number 4 exploded and released nuclear waste across Europe. And now there are concerns from a number of Ukrainian authorities about what a Russian occupation of the former nuclear power plant might mean. One advisor to Ukraine's Interior Ministry said that it could mean that there's nuclear waste once again being released over Europe and that the current condition of the power plant could not be ascertained. Now, it's not clear what the ramifications of Russia's occupation of Chernobyl could be, but it is certainly a strategic position. Mariam, Vladimir Putin said that with this operation, Russia wanted to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. But his counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, has said that exactly what Russia has done is what Nazi Germany itself did during the Second World War.
OK, Matthew, thank you for that update. Now, EU leaders are meeting in Brussels for an emergency summit on the unfolding crisis. The EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, said that while dialogue is key, the EU will build on the package of measures against Russia.
Diplomatic reach out that still constitutes an important tool on facing Russia. And second, building the sanctions that has been agreed more or less by the repair member states, and now it has to be decided by the leaders, and tomorrow will be formally agreed by the Foreign Affairs Council on my proposal, because as you know, sanctions is something that belongs to the competence of the Council.
Now, the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, says that the EU leaders need to adopt tough sanctions which bark, not bite, and quickly.
We don't need big declarations tonight. What we need is decisions, and is prompt decisions. Decisions, that means that we don't need sanctions that bark. We need sanctions that bite, and if the sanctions bite, they need to bite in a very thorough way. It means that we need sanctions that have a big impact on the Russian side. That means that for Belgium, what is on the table today as a package of sanctions should be put into action as swift as possible. But from our side, we would like to add additional financial sanctions, which makes it hard for Russian financial institutions, Russian corporates, makes it harder for them to access the international financial markets.
OK, well, let's now go to Brussels and to our correspondent, Shona Murray, who's, of course, following that EU Leaders Summit. So we've heard from the Leaders Summit, but what have they said? If you could round that up for us.
Well, we've seen from the conclusions of tonight that obviously the EU condemns in its strongest possible way the illegal, unjustified, unprovoked aggression against Russia, that all 27 and the EU institutions hold one person responsible, Vladimir Putin, that he'll be held. The second set of sanctions in 24 hours will be agreed, and on Friday they'll be triggered, essentially. What we know is